Well, hello, teacher friends. Welcome to the Beyond Measure podcast. Just in case you are new around here, my name is Christina Whitlock, and I consider myself your anytime piano teacher friend. While this podcast has historically been a solo show, this summer I am hosting some conversations with my fellow teacher friends. We are taking a look back at previous episode topics and seeing where the discussion takes us. You are going to love today's guest. We've prepared an exceptional conversation for you today, and we have a special bonus episode available only for members of the Patreon community. If you want to help support the work I do here at Beyond Measure, as well as score yourself some incredible bonuses this summer, head to christinawhitlock.com/Patreon for all the details. Again, that's christinawhitlock.com/Patreon. And now, friends, let's get on with the show. You are listening to the Summertime Conversation series here on the Beyond Measure podcast. Teacher friends, I have such a treat for you today. I knew I wanted to invite Merideth Hite-Estevez on the conversation series this summer, but I had one really big dilemma. Which episode topic should we revisit? We could have talked about any number of things, but I decided to keep it somewhat general and revisit episode number 82, which was titled Cheers to the Creative Life. If you are not familiar with Merideth Hite-Estevez, let me just say this. The things that I aim to do here at Beyond Measure for your teacher self is what Meredith aims to do for your creative artist self. Meredith hosts a brilliant podcast each week called Artists for Joy. It's totally binge-worthy. Go back to the beginning and listen to everything. Her goal is to help artists of all kinds reconnect with the joy of creative work. She's a Juilliard-trained oboist and has earned her stripes as someone who has overcome the burnout that many of us experience as musicians and teachers. I never miss an episode of Artists for Joy, and I am so excited that Meredith has a book releasing this very week. You can order The Artist's Joy by Merideth Hite-Estevez at the link in today's show notes, or anywhere else for that matter. Meredith also has a creative coaching practice where she works one-on-one with artists who need help, and we're giving you a glimpse into that work today in the Patreon community, where I let Meredith walk me through a coaching exercise that got pretty heavy. If you want to know what brings me to tears, you'll want to check out that coaching exercise available exclusively to Patreon community members. So now, without further ado, I give you today's conversation with Merideth Hite-Estevez. Meredith Hite-Estevez, we are so glad that you're here joining us on Beyond Measure today. You are the perfect person to revisit this conversation with. Today, we're looking back at episode 82, which is Cheers to the Creative Life. And the creative life is something you know a thing or two about. You're kind of my go-to voice in life for creative recovery. So I'm wondering if you can give us just a really quick rundown of why the creative journey and the idea of creative recovery matters so much to you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here, Christina. I'm honored because I know that you're new to interviewing people, so I'm thrilled. Creative recovery. Yes, it is a word, a phrase that came into popularity with Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way, which is one of the top selling self-help books ever in all time. And I think it's popular because we all can connect to that. Once upon a time, I was creative. So creative recovery is really reconnecting with the joy of making things you care about, which is my definition of creativity that I stole from Eric Booth. Creativity is just making things you care about. And so recovery of that is remembering the joy that you used to feel when you were making things. And so creative recovery isn't just for professional quote unquote artists, capital A artists. It's really for all people because there's so much joy in the act of making things, from making dinner to designing our homes to writing a short story or a poem or a piece of music or working to tackle a Beethoven sonata, right? And so we all are born with that impulse to create things. And so creative recovery is just a chance to reconnect with that childlike love of creativity.
I love that idea so much. And that's why you are such an important conversation partner for this series, because my audience, which is primarily comprised of piano teachers, a lot of us are the first to confess that when we're busy teaching, we kind of get separated from that identity as a capital C creative. Like, I know that I went through a pretty long stretch of my life where creative would have been pretty low on my list of
Hmm.
characteristics that I would use to describe myself. I'm very curious about the advice that you have for teachers who find themselves wondering what happened to that creative spark.
Hmm. Well, in my book, which I hope we'll talk more about as the interview goes on, my book comes out June 25th. And in the book, I talk about this complex thing that we find in the world, that creativity brings joy to people. Music brings joy. There's studies that show that it lowers stress. I read a study the other day that said listening to music and singing music actually reduces the inflammation in your body, like
Wow.
head exploding, right? And so we all have experienced the collective joy that the arts bring. And yet, there's also stats on the other end of the spectrum that musicians struggle with depression and anxiety, that artists on the whole struggle with substance abuse and mental health disorders exponentially more than the average individual who wouldn't call themselves creative. And so, how are both of those things true? That the arts bring joy and the artist struggles to maintain their joy. And so, that's really where my work lives, is sort of in between that space of exploring how creativity sparks joy in each of us, and why or how the creative can lose that and then stay on the path to letting their creative impulse be a wellspring for being well and experiencing joy. And so, if you feel that you've lost that creative spark, you should know that you're not alone. And I coach one on one and in groups a lot of creatives who experience that. Like, I am the capital C creative person in my family, I'm the music person, I'm the arts person. And yet they don't feel creative at all. That's this, the story of my book is how a long-term training in music, classical music specifically, I'm an oboist, began to I used it as sort of a measuring stick about how good I am and how worthy I am. And so if you lost that creative spark, it can be because you've made creativity the tool with which you measure your goodness or your worthiness.
Mm.
And so if that's you, you're not alone. And I know, as a teacher myself, I used to be a college professor. The more I sought creative joy from playing my instrument, the instrument I was teaching, the better teacher I became. The students saw me lighting up again for the music. And my daughter plays cello, Suzuki cello, and it's helpful that it's not the oboe because I don't have baggage with cello, but her learning has really helped me heal my perfectionism and things that come along with classical music and the stories I tell myself about playing in tune or not. And so I think this is a really important topic for teachers, because I want every student that I come in contact with, I want every student that my daughter's cello teacher teaches to know the way back to experiencing joy, even when they're working really hard to play the right rhythms and the right notes.
That's really beautiful. My audience knows fully well that one of my main goals is to make sure that students are not looking at their music as an endless series of checklists and do's and don'ts and rules. And I used to be really big on helping my students see, like, oh, look where you can go in the future. Let's invest in your future self. That was my studio mantra one year. And then I really got convicted because I thought, gosh, if we're only working for our future selves, and we're really missing the whole point. And so being able to celebrate that musician that we are today, or that creative in whatever regard that we are today, is so important. And so I feel like that aligns really well with your journey. So again,
Yeah,
I just
totally. I wonder if you ever play duets, if the practice of playing duets with your students is common, because I integrated that into my studio when I was teaching at college, and that was how we started the first lesson. And it was always important that the student be sight reading
mm-hmm.
because they were mostly very nervous. But when we found, after many lessons of doing that, that was the first thing we did every lesson, just take 5, 7 minutes or something to play through, sight read something. It became a check-in, sort of a joy touchstone where we can have a little fun. And you have to find the right level of the duet because you don't want it to defeat them. But I never did that with my teachers. It was always like straight into, here's what you're doing wrong. And I'm grateful for all the things they taught me. And yet I think in our field, it's just not a priority to prioritize the fun and the play and the joy.
Right. It's that whole contradiction between we play our instrument in quotations, and yet there's can sometimes be very little play involved. I had an adult student here for one of her first lessons recently, and she's in a situation I encounter a lot of adult students in, where she's retired and she's finally committing to things that she's always wanted to do. And we were playing a duet early on. I do lots of duet playing with my students, so we're aligned in that as well. And I looked over and she just had tears just falling down her face. And she said, that made me really emotional because there's also that collaboration, right? And that sparks joy and connection. And it is so important. So look at you bringing the teaching tips, guys. Those duets are so important. They're so important. When I think about your podcast, Artists for Joy, there is an episode from season 2, episode 18. I'll link it in the show notes. But you called it Reparenting Our Inner Artist Child. And this is like my favorite episode, maybe, if I had to pick one. I have a presentation that I give to music teacher groups on self-reflection practices. And one of the exercises that I give them is built on helping them reconnect with their childhood artist self. I'm just thinking back to all the things that used to light me up as a child. And I love helping teachers find that spark again and think about the things that they loved as creative children. So, can you talk about what is so powerful about learning to reparent that inner artist child?
Yeah, that's chapter 1 of my book, really,
Oh,
because
great.
I know that in this work of creative recovery that we do, it brings up a lot of stuff. Because, like we said at the top, when you think back to what you loved about yourself as a child, what you loved to do, what you loved to make as a child, we were all creative. Usually, most of us, right by those memories, are stories of pain where we were not encouraged, or our teachers told us we weren't talented, or our parents told us we weren't talented, or that we weren't good enough, or we were afraid to go after it because we thought we needed to get a respectable job. And so there's a lot there. And I think that's a really important first thing to recognize when we talk about creative recovery, is that right next to the impulse that is, it's very childlike and central to who you are, right next to that impulse is some work that needs to be done to reparent ourselves. And hey, I had a great childhood. I really did.
Right.
I just think that as we grow, that's a gift we can give to ourselves, is to accept ourselves and to go back with the help of a therapist, with the help of a coach, and do some of that compassionate, loving, healing work of forgiveness, self-forgiveness, forgiving others, and working to sort of mourn and grieve the things that you've left behind or that you can't change, and then to take that and turn towards the future. And it's really a work of integration. The epigraph of my book is a quote by Madeleine L'Engle: "The discipline of creation, be it to paint, compose, write, is an effort towards wholeness." And so the creative recovery work is so important, because when we're seeking a wholehearted life where we can truly be ourselves and the people we're called to be, we have to go and integrate and reparent that inner artist child to recover our creative joy.
That's beautiful. I know I've heard you share that quote before, and I go, ah, every time. It's so nice.
Yeah, and it is hard work, but it's really worth it. And it can be a lot of fun. It will be fun to let go. And I have people in my Artist Way groups that I lead online that talk about how resistant they are to the inner child work because of their trauma. And I totally get that. And so I just want to say that out loud that it's okay if you don't feel ready to jump into that, those memories and those things. And you're not alone in that experience and in those memories. And so I hope that you'll feel encouraged to go and explore that when you're ready, when you have friends and medical professionals who can go with you.
Yeah, that's so important. Thank you for saying that. I know you and I both are big fans on Paul Graham and his maker schedule versus manager schedule concept. This is something you and I have both talked about. But I'm curious if you can kind of dive a little deeper into that. Like, give us the idea and the difference between maker and manager schedules. And if you have any advice for creatives who are probably likely to thrive on a maker's schedule, but are confined to a manager's schedule because we have scheduled lessons, tell us what advice you have for us.
Sure. So, yeah, let's just catch everybody up in case they don't know about Paul Graham and that essay he wrote. And it's pretty dated now. I think it was the early 2000s when it came out, but it's a really great thought. So, he is a computer scientist, and he was reflecting in this article about how when they were building things and creating things and needed the creative energy to sort of dream and imagine these fun, complex systems for computer science, they needed whole swaths of time to do that. That it wasn't something that they could do in hour increments. Whereas the manager side of the work required those 1 hour meetings. And he reflects in that essay about the world is sort of functioning as a manager, right? That we have calendars that have hour increments. And in school, we have 45-minute blocks and 50-minute classes and 10 minutes to walk to the next one. And so we're sort of training our kids and our own selves to sort of function in this manager schedule. And as an artist, I have to be both, right? I need to be a manager to have a website and have a weekly podcast and to get things done and get the tasks done. But for me, what made this such a freeing idea was that you can't use the measuring sticks that you're using in manager world to manage your maker time, because it's like using the metric system when we're in another place. As a maker, you might need to light a candle first. You might need to go on a walk. You might need to take more breaks, or maybe you need to practice without a break for a good hour and a half. And so it's not going to necessarily fit into that manager check the box schedule. And so a lot of my clients come to me with this problem. I have this problem. I have small children. I have babysitters who only can stay a number of hours. So I don't often have the large swaths of time. And here's my advice. First of all, I think we need to pour some maker energy into our manager life, sprinkle some of it on. Where can you think or dream or play with something short and simple? So it's not all or nothing. It's not black and white, on or off. It's not even totally maker versus manager. That's what they want us to believe. But where can you first build your strength and your maker impulse and figure out a way to sort of inject it into your manager life? And you're going to encounter some resistance. I mean, that's why Stephen Pressfield wrote that book, The War of Art. It is not easy, but the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Little sprinkles of 15 minutes here, 10 minutes there, a couple notes, and you have yourself a podcast or a poem or a project.
Yeah, that reminds me a lot of what you talk about, which is creating in the cracks, right? Do you want to enlighten my audience on what you mean by
Exactly.
creating in the cracks?
Yes. So creating in the cracks of life is an invitation to find and inject that creative joy into your everyday. And for me, most of my book was written when it was still dark outside in the morning at 5 a.m. And I love telling people that. And then I love following it up with, but don't get defeated if you're not a morning person, because I found a crack of time where I could think before my children wake up from 5 to 6 or 5, depending. Sometimes they wake up at 5:45 and I want to like poke my eyes out. But where in your life can you find a crack? And it can be 15 minutes. Like when you're stuck in between activities and instead of stopping at Starbucks, could you pull over and write for 10 minutes? And I know you want more time than that. I know it can be frustrating to sort of whiplash from one thing to another, but I am shocked at after 4 or 5 years of creating in the cracks since 2020, when I started this work as a writer and a podcaster, all of it was done in the cracks. And it takes a really long time to get the same amount of stuff done. If I didn't have a family, if I didn't have a job, like I could have written 5 books by now, but I don't need to have written 5 books right now. Right. And so what are some stories you're telling yourself about what kind of time you have to be creative, and how can you rewrite those to help you be surprised by what is possible instead of focusing on what isn't?
Wow. In my own podcasting journey, which also started in 2020, I think the same thing where I've powered through, I've scripted this thing, I've created this weekly episode for almost 4 years now. And then all of a sudden, I have this giant body of work. And I think from the outside, before starting it, you think, oh, I don't have time to do this thing. But by golly, sometimes that manager schedule of having to publish something every Monday morning really works for us.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you. You can inject the maker energy into your manager life, but you can also do the opposite. Like, where can you use your manager self, your mind that's so good at handling everything, and put that on your maker and be diligent about, okay, this is when we're scheduling this time. I'm using my lunch break. I have a coaching client who is a higher ed education administrator, and she's a pianist. She's a jazz pianist. She's an amazing person, but she works in this very manager field. She's managing faculty and provosts. I mean, she's just like a really high-powered manager. And she really wanted to create. She wants to do it. She has one jazz piano album. She wants to do another one. She has these big dreams. And we worked with her schedule and tried to find time for her to practice. And she had this long commute. I mean, it was like, it was not going to happen. And as you know, as a pianist, you can't just be like, oh, let me just stop and practice right here in the Starbucks parking lot.
Right.
So what she ended up doing was taking her lunch break and walking over to the music department and finding a piano. And that was like a 10-minute walk there. She had like 35 minutes to practice, and that 10-minute walk back. It brought so much joy to her life, Christina. I cannot even tell you. And it was like 30 minutes of playing the piano, but it was like she had this like secret meeting with herself every day, every work day. And again, it's just a chance for you to stop believing the lie that it has to be all or nothing, and to begin to experience the joy of creativity again.
Wow, that is an inspiring kick in the pants, I'll tell ya. So I know you and I both have this lifelong struggle with prioritizing productivity, quote, over things that really should matter more to us. So, what is the single most important lesson that you've learned in your work to help you and the rest of us remember that our worth is not defined by our output? Because I know that's a big one for me.
Oh, yeah. I was reflecting. I did another interview during my book launch about what's been surprising or what's been the hardest part about this book writing thing. And what I realized was that it's really tempting to put all the pressure I had put on myself about music to just put that down and pick it up and make it now about being an author, right?
Mm-hmm.
To put the same perfectionistic, seeking worthiness, needing to be excellent at all costs, and not sleeping and over exercising and letting the stress sort of push me so far that I'm actually not taking care of myself. And my writing coach, my friend Ann Croker, always says, whatever you are writing about, God will give you a chance to prove your theories.
That's really good.
So I, in these last couple of weeks especially, had to dial back, get back into therapy, spend more time working the tools I know that work, that are in my book, to help me overcome that thing of equating my work with my worth. And so I think the single most important lesson for me now is that knowing that's not like a one and done thing. Like, oh, we've overcome that.
Mhm.
We bought a t-shirt, right? We wrote a book about it. But that's the joy that creative recovery offers. And anybody who's in substance abuse recovery will tell you it's not just one day you're not addicted anymore. It's that you have to work at that all the time. And
Mhm.
so I think that's what I want to say is that it's an invitation to love yourself well and to offer yourself compassion every day and to know that this is going to be something that's for some people like you and me that is going to keep coming up. And it doesn't mean we're bad. It doesn't mean we haven't mastered ourselves. It just means that we have this deep desire to share our hearts through our work.
Mhm.
And it's the sharing and the doing the thing, the creating the process of doing it. That's more important than the products we make. And so
Mhm.
really enjoying the process of that and let that be joyful so that you don't always believe that just across the hill, that's when I'll be happy is when I have this many downloads or when I have this many book sales and really trying to enjoy the now. So I hope that helps.
Oh, it helps so much. My husband and I are always laughing at each other because we are not like the joy is in the journey kind of people.
Yeah.
When we're on a trip, we want to get there, and I'm
Yeah.
always like, oh, we need to work on this.
Yeah.
So, you have a book coming out, Meredith. I don't know if you know that. It's kind of a big deal. So, your book is called The Artist's Joy. Tell us about it and tell us where we can find you online and all the things that you want us to know.
Yes, The Artist's Joy, a guide to getting unstuck, embracing imperfection, and loving your creative life, is really a roadmap for anyone who wants to feel joy through creativity again or for the first time. And it's got really something for everybody. It's got coaching exercises. I think we're going to do one of them for the Patreon listeners. So join Patreon so you can hear that in a moment. So I call them etudes after the idea of a musical etude. So this idea of exercising certain skills and sharpening different ways to think and overcome failure and rejection and feedback and how to stop caring what people think so much, how to craft goals that align with who you are at your core. One of my favorite chapters is subtitled Creativity is Tapas, Not Pie. So it's an invitation for you to begin that work of creative recovery. And it includes stories of my coaching clients who've given me permission to share. It's my story after I graduated from Juilliard, bouncing back from intense burnout and creative block. And I hope you'll give it a read. It is available where all books are sold. And you can find me online at Artists for Joy on Instagram and Facebook. And my podcast, Artists for Joy, is available wherever you stream your show.
Well, that is quite a rundown of the many promises of your book. And I know through being such an avid fan of yours over the years that you will deliver on that.
Thank you for your support, Christina, and thanks for having me on.
No problem. So the show is called Beyond Measure, Meredith. And now I need to know something, no serious answers allowed, that you love beyond measure. Lay it on me.
I gotta say, I have this Vincent van Gogh Starry Night AirPod case that I got at one of the like Van Gogh exhibits. It might have been at the Detroit Institute of Arts. And it brings me so much joy, not only because I love Van Gogh and I love the stories we now know about Van Gogh and his struggles. And for me, he's an artist that not only does his work evoke deep joy and beauty in me, but I love reading his letters that he wrote to his brother Theo. And so I feel very simpatico with Vincent van Gogh. So it's like I have this little Starry Night AirPods case, and every time I open it, it's like I feel joy. So
I love that. And the idea of surrounding ourselves with small things, even as simple as pulling out our AirPods and letting that spark a little bit of joy. That's really sums up your work so well.
and I almost didn't buy it because I think it was expensive. I mean, I don't remember exactly what it cost, but it was like, is it worth that? Is it worth that? And it totally was. And so if you're sitting on something and you're wondering, is it worth the money? Like sit with it, sleep on it overnight, and if it gives you that little spark of creative joy, then it's worth it, probably.
It's worth it. I love that. Well, I close every episode with a little toast to the profession. So I'm curious if you would mind taking that job over for me today.
Do I need to get my drink?
We can. Here's
Okay.
mine.
Okay, your water bottles. Here's to recovering joy for your creative work, whether that's piano or watercolor or crafting, putting words in a specific order. Here's to recovering the joy in it. One day, one step, one creating in the crack at a time. Here, here.
Here, here. That's beautiful. My guests have been really good at the toast thing, I got to tell you.
I love that you do that. It's so fun.
Well, thank you, Meredith, for joining us today. I'm sure we're all going to run out and order The Artist's Joy, and we can't wait to hear all of the reviews just rushing right on in. And I'll be sure to link all of the things and all of the ways people can find you online in the show notes for today's episode. Meredith is hanging around for a bonus conversation that will go on the Patreon site, and she is working through a coaching exercise with me live and in real time, and I've promised her I will be an open book, so you won't want to miss that. Join the Patreon to check out that bonus material. Thanks so much, Meredith, for being here. It was such a joy.
Thank you, Christina.
Oh, I love conversations with my friends. Thanks for listening today. You can find links to the original episode mentioned today, as well as information on how to join the Patreon community to get access to this summer's bonus conversations, all in the show notes for today's episode. Don't be a stranger, my friends. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Beyond Measure Podcast. I would love to hear from you and find out what you've been up to this summer. Until we meet again, friends, onward and upward.